Everyone in Chicago knew the rule. You do not look Julian Moretti in the eye, and you never, ever approach his table. But that night at Giovanni's, the silence was shattered by a scream that wasn't from a victim, it was from a baby. A baby that wouldn't stop crying. The entire restaurant held its breath as the Mafia Don's patience snapped. One woman, a struggling single mother with nothing left to lose, stood up. She walked past the armed guards and did the unthinkable. She didn't beg for mercy. She scolded the devil himself. What happened next didn't just break the rules. It started a war. The rain was hammering against the stained glass windows of Giovanni's, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant. But inside the air was so still it felt like a vacuum. It was November the 14th, a Tuesday. The kind of night where the city feels bruised and angry. Sarah Bennett sat in the corner booth nursing a lukewarm glass of water. She shouldn't have been there. She couldn't afford the water, let alone the risotto. She was 26, wearing a coat that had been mended 3 times and staring at an empty chair. The lawyer she had scraped together her savings to meet Mr. Henderson was 40 minutes late. He was her last hope for keeping full custody of her daughter Lily against an ex-husband who had more money than morals. But Mr. Henderson wasn't coming. She knew it in her gut. Just as the despair began to claw at her throat, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a drop in pressure. The heavy oak doors swung open and 4 men walked in. The maitre d', a man who usually looked down his nose at senators, practically bowed to the floor. "Mr. Moretti, we have your table ready." Julian Moretti. Even Sarah, who tried to keep her head down and stay out of trouble, knew the name. The press called him a shipping magnate. The streets called him the Capo dei Capi. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Sarah's life earnings. His face was a mask of cold, sharp angles, dark eyes scanning the room for threats. But in his arms, clutched awkwardly against that expensive suit, was a bundle wrapped in blue cashmere. A baby. The sight was so jarring that Sarah blinked. The most dangerous man in Chicago was holding an infant like it was a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. They sat at the center table, table 4. The bodyguards took up positions, their jackets bulging with obvious weaponry. The restaurant went silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died. Then it started. A whimper at first, then a wail, then a full-blown, lung-shredding scream. The baby was distressed. Julian Moretti stiffened. He jiggled the baby roughly, his expression shifting from cold indifference to panic and finally to simmering rage. "Marco," Julian snapped at the man to his right. "Make it stop." "Boss, I don't know how," Marco stammered, looking terrified. The crying grew louder. It was a piercing shriek of pure discomfort. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to look. The tension in the room was a physical weight. You could feel the violence radiating off Julian. He was losing control, and a man like Julian Moretti hated losing control. "Get the car," Julian hissed, standing up. The baby arched his back, screaming harder. Julian's grip tightened clearly too hard. Sarah felt a pull in her chest. It was the biological override, the mother's instinct that bypasses all logic and fear. She watched the man's large hand gripping the infant's fragile ribcage. He was hurting the child, not out of malice, but out of sheer incompetence and frustration. She didn't think. She didn't consider the guns. She didn't think about her custody battle or the fact that she was a nobody. Sarah stood up. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. One of the bodyguards, a massive man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped in her path. His hand went inside his jacket. "Sit down, lady," he growled. "Move," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "He's holding the baby wrong. He's going to bruise him." The bodyguard blinked, stunned by her audacity. In that split second of confusion, Sarah sidestepped him. She walked right up to table 4. Up to the devil. Julian Moretti turned his dark, lethal gaze onto her. His eyes were like ice. "Who are you?" he snarled. "Get back before I—" "You're pinching his diaphragm." Sarah interrupted, her eyes locking onto his. She wasn't looking at the mob boss. She was looking at a clueless father. "Look at his face. He's not hungry. He's gasping. You're panic squeezing him." The entire restaurant seemed to gasp. The staff watched in horror, expecting her to be dragged out or shot. "Give him to me," Sarah commanded. She held out her arms. It was the unthinkable act, demanding the heir to the Moretti empire. Julian looked at the screaming child, then at the woman with the frayed coat and the fierce eyes. He was drowning and she was a life raft. Slowly, hesitantly, he passed the bundle over. Sarah took the baby Leo, she would later learn, and immediately shifted his position. She rested him high on her shoulder, pressing his tummy against her collarbone, and began a rhythmic, firm pat on his back while swaying her hips. "Shh, it's okay. You're okay." She hummed the vibration of her chest, soothing the child. In 10 seconds, the screaming turned to whimpers. In 20 seconds, the whimpers stopped. In 30 seconds, the baby let out a long, shuddering breath and fell asleep. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but this time it wasn't fear. It was shock. Sarah gently pulled the blanket away from the baby's face, checking his color. She looked up and found Julian Moretti staring at her. The ice in his eyes had cracked, revealing something intense and calculating. "He has colic," Sarah whispered, handing the sleeping child back to the stunned father. "Burp him halfway through the feed, not just at the end. And loosen your tie. The fabric is scratching his cheek." She didn't wait for a thank you. The adrenaline crashed, and the realization of what she had just done washed over her. She turned around, grabbed her purse from her booth, and walked out of the restaurant, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She thought she had escaped. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the gun outline in the bodyguard's jacket. She sat in her tiny, drafty apartment in the Englewood district, watching her own daughter Lily sleep. Lily was 4. She was the light of Sarah's life, and the reason Sarah worked double shifts at a diner and took cleaning jobs on weekends. But with her ex-husband Gary petitioning for full custody, citing her financial instability, Sarah felt the walls closing in. Gary had a new wife, a new house, and a good lawyer. Sarah had overdue rent and a broken toaster. The next morning, Sarah was at the diner wiping down the counter. It was 10:00 a.m., the lull after the breakfast rush. "Sarah," her manager, frantic and pale, hissed from the kitchen window. There are men outside for you." Sarah's heart stopped. Gary. Did he send the police? She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front. 2 black SUVs were parked at the curb, blocking the morning traffic. The same massive bodyguard from the restaurant, the one with the scarred eyebrow, was standing by the door. He wasn't reaching for a weapon this time. He was holding it open. "Mr. Moretti requests your presence," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I have a shift. I can't leave." Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We bought the diner," the man said flatly. "Your shift is over. Please, Ms. Bennett. The boss doesn't like to wait." They knew her name. Of course they did. Sarah got in the car. The drive was silent. They didn't go to a warehouse or a dark alley. They drove north to the Gold Coast, pulling up to a limestone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Iron gates swung open, revealing a driveway filled with luxury cars. Inside the house was cold, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. Marble floors, modern art that looked like spilled ink and silence. She was led to a study. Julian Moretti was sitting behind a mahogany desk reading a document. He didn't look up immediately. "Sarah Bennett," he said, turning a page. "Age 26, divorced, one daughter, Lily. Currently 3 months behind on rent. Embroiled in a custody battle with Gary Bennett, a car salesman with a gambling problem. He hides well." Sarah felt violated. "How do you know all that?" Julian looked up. Without the baby in his arms, he was terrifying again. "I know everything about people who touch my son." He stood up and walked around the desk. He held out a black envelope. "What is this?" Sarah asked, not taking it. "Severance pay for your diner job," Julian said, "and an advance." "I don't understand." "My son Leo. He hasn't stopped crying since his mother died 3 months ago. Nanny's last 2 days. Some quit, some I fire." Julian's jaw tightened. Last night was the first time he slept more than an hour. "He likes you." Sarah stared at him. "You want to hire me as a nanny?" "I want to hire you as a mother," Julian corrected. "Not to me, to him. I need someone who isn't afraid of me and who clearly knows what she's doing." "I can't," Sarah backed away. "I know who you are, Mr. Moretti. I can't bring my daughter into this world. I'm trying to get custody, not lose it, because I'm associating with the Mafia." Julian smirked, but it was humorless. "Let's look at your reality, Sarah. You have no lawyer. Your ex-husband has bought off the judge. Did you know that he's going to take Lily on Friday?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "No, that's not true." "It is, I checked." Julian tossed the black envelope on the table. "Inside that envelope is a check for $50,000, enough to hire the best family law attorney in the state. And if you take the job, you and Lily move in here, 24-hour security, a chef, a driver. And no one, not Gary, not the judge, not God himself, takes your daughter away." It was a deal with the devil. Sarah knew it. She looked at the check peeking out of the envelope. It was freedom. It was safety for Lily. But it was also a golden cage. "What's the catch?" she whispered. Julian stepped closer, invading her personal space. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and expensive tobacco. "The catch is that once you are in, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You live by my rules. You don't ask about my business. You don't look in rooms that are locked. And you never leave the house without my permission. You belong to the family now." Sarah thought of Lily's face. She thought of Gary taking her away. "I have one condition," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. Julian raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to bargain, Ms. Bennett. But entertain me. I'm not just the nanny. I eat dinner with you," she said. "If I'm living here, I'm not hiding in the servants' quarters while you play lord of the manor. I want my daughter to feel like this is a home, not a prison. We eat at the table. Same food, same respect." Julian stared at her for a long moment. The tension in the room was electric. He wasn't used to demands. Finally, A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "Don't be late." Moving into the Moretti estate was like moving into a mausoleum. The silence was different here. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library. It was the suffocating silence of secrets. Sarah and Lily were given a suite in the East Wing. It was larger than Sarah's entire apartment complex. Lily, wide-eyed and clutching her worn-out teddy bear, ran in circles on the Persian rug, delighted by how soft it was. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The staff moved like ghosts. They were efficient, polite, and completely emotionless. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Galloway, was a woman in her 60s with a face made of granite. She had looked at Sarah's cheap suitcases with a disdain so subtle it was almost impressive. "Mr. Moretti does not like noise," Mrs. Galloway had warned them upon arrival. "He does not like clutter, and the West Wing is strictly forbidden." "Understood," Sarah had said, though her eyes immediately drifted to the heavy oak doors that separated the West Wing from the main hall. The first challenge came that very afternoon. It was time for Leo's nap. Sarah walked into the nursery. It was a room out of a magazine, all whites, greys, and sleek, modern furniture. It was pristine. It was also freezing. The air conditioning was blasting, and there wasn't a single toy in sight, just a crib that looked more like a cage. Leo was in the crib, staring up at a blank white ceiling, making that low, heartbreaking whimpering sound again. Sarah picked him up. His skin was cool to the touch. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, rubbing his arms. "No wonder you cry. You're in an icebox." She looked for a thermostat. It was locked behind a plastic case. Sarah found Mrs. Galloway in the hallway. "I need the key to the nursery thermostat. It's too cold." "Mr. Moretti prefers the house at 68 degrees, Paul," Mrs. Galloway said without stopping her dusting. "It keeps the art preserved." "He's a baby, not a painting," Sarah snapped. "Key, now!" Mrs. Galloway hesitated, then scoffed. "You may be the nanny Miss Bennet, but you do not run this house." "No," a deep voice rumbled from the stairs. "But she runs that room." Julian Moretti descended the staircase. He had changed out of his suit into a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and covered in faint white scars. Mrs. Galloway paled. "Sir, I was just—" "Give her the key," Julian said, not looking at the housekeeper. His eyes were on Sarah. "And get the child a heater until the system is adjusted." Mrs. Galloway handed over the key with trembling fingers and scurried away. Julian walked up to Sarah. He was imposing his presence, filling the hallway. He looked at Leo, who was now resting his head on Sarah's shoulder, quiet and content. "You're good with him," Julian said, sounding almost accusatory. "He just needs warmth, Mr. Moretti. Babies need to feel like they aren't alone." Julian's jaw tightened. A shadow passed over his face. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. "My wife, Isabella, she wanted the nursery to be perfect, modern, clean." "It's sterile," Sarah said honestly. "He needs color. He needs soft things. I want to paint it." "Paint it?" Julian blinked. "Yes, a soft yellow, or a green. And I want a rocking chair. A wood one, not that metal thing in there." Julian stared at her. No one made demands of the Don. But then he looked at his son, who was reaching out a tiny hand to grab a lock of Sarah's hair. "Do whatever you want," Julian said, turning away. "Just make sure he sleeps." That night, the first family dinner took place. The dining room table was long enough to seat 20 people. Julian sat at the head. Sarah and Lily sat to his right. The distance between them felt like miles. Lily, usually a chatterbox, was intimidated by the high ceilings and the silent servers. She picked at her spaghetti, which was gourmet truffle-infused, and not at all what a 4-year-old liked. "Is the food not to your liking?" Julian asked. His voice was deep, startling Lily. Lily looked up, terrified. "It tastes like dirt," she whispered. Sarah gasped. "Lily, it's truffles. It's very fancy." Julian paused. He looked at his plate. He took a bite. "She's right," he said. "It tastes like dirt." He signaled the chef, who was hovering in the corner. "Grilled cheese," Julian ordered. "For the girl. And for me as well." The chef looked horrified, but nodded. Lily giggled. It was a tiny sound, but it echoed in the large room. Julian looked at the little girl, and for the first time the hardness in his eyes softened. "Where is the baby's mummy?" Lily asked, suddenly, swinging her legs. Sarah froze. "Lily, we don't ask." "She's in heaven," Julian answered. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Did she get sick?" Lily asked, oblivious to the tension radiating off the bodyguards by the door. "No," Julian said. He took a sip of dark red wine. "Bad men took her away." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The reality of where she was crashed back in. This wasn't just a rich man's house. This was a fortress built on blood. "My daddy is a bad man," Lily stated matter-of-factly. "He yells at Mommy. He broke the toaster." Julian's gaze shifted to Sarah. He studied a bruise on her arm that she had tried to cover with makeup, a parting gift from Gary a week ago when he tried to force his way into her apartment. Julian didn't say anything. He just stared at the bruise until Sarah self-consciously pulled her sleeve down. "Nobody will break your toasters here, Lily," Julian said quietly. "I promise." The moment was interrupted by Marco, the head of security, bursting into the room. He didn't apologize. "Boss, we have a problem at the docks. The Russians." Julian's face instantly changed. The father was gone. The Don was back. He stood up, throwing his napkin on the table. "Take them to their rooms," Julian ordered. Marco not looking back at Sarah. "Lock the doors. No one comes in or out until I return." "Julian!" Sarah stood up, the name slipping out before she could stop it. He paused at the door. He looked back, his eyes dark and dangerous. "Go to your room, Sarah. Forget what you hear tonight." He left. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She held Lily and Leo in her bed, listening to the sound of cars speeding away, and later the distant muffled sound of shouting in the courtyard. She realized then that the golden cage was still a cage, and the wolves were scratching at the door. 3 weeks passed. The rhythm of the house changed. The nursery was no longer white. Sarah had painted it a soft sage green. There were stuffed animals, a comfortable wooden rocker, and a mobile of stars that she had made herself. Leo was a different baby. He gained weight. He smiled. He slept. And Julian changed too. He was still cold, still distant, often disappearing for days at a time. But when he was home, he spent time in the nursery. He would stand in the doorway, watching Sarah rock Leo to sleep. Sometimes he would sit in the armchair and just listen to her hum. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah was in the kitchen teaching the stiff French chef how to make chocolate chip cookies for Lily. Flour was everywhere. Lily was laughing, her face smeared with chocolate. Julian walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo, clearly headed to a gala. He stopped staring at the mess in his pristine kitchen. The chef looked terrified. "Sir, I tried to stop them. It's fine," Julian said. He walked over to the counter, dipped a finger into the batter bowl, and tasted it. "Needs more salt." Sarah laughed. She actually laughed at the Mafia Don. "You're a critic now." "I know good food," Julian said. His eyes lingered on her face. She was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans covered in flour, her hair in a messy bun. And he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. The air between them crackled. It was dangerous. "I have a request," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "Yes, the chaotic mess you've made of my kitchen. Clean it up," he said, but there was a smirk playing on his lips. "And tomorrow, I need you to come with me." "Come with you where?" "I have a meeting, a negotiation. It helps to have a softer presence. You will bring Leo. We will present the image of a stable, happy father." "You want me to be a prop?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms. "I want you to be my shield." Julian admitted a rare moment of vulnerability. "They won't shoot if there is a woman and child. It's the code." "That's comforting," Sarah said sarcastically. But she agreed. The meeting was at a vineyard estate outside the city. It was beautiful, rolling hills and autumn leaves. But the men sitting at the patio table were sharks. Sarah sat beside Julian Leo on her lap. She wore a simple navy dress Julian had bought for her. She played the part perfectly, the attentive mother, the quiet partner. Across the table sat Luca Vitti, the head of the rival family. He was older, greasy, with yellow teeth. "You look soft, Julian," Vitti sneered, blowing cigar smoke toward the baby. Sarah waved the smoke away with her hand glaring at the man. "I look settled," Julian corrected. "There is a difference." "And who is this?" Vitti gestured to Sarah with his cigar. "The new flavor of the month. She's pretty, a bit skinny for my taste." Julian's hand clenched into a fist on the table. Sarah saw the knuckles turn white. "She is the mother of my son," Julian lied smoothly. "And you will speak to her with respect." Vitti laughed. "Or what, you'll start a war over a nanny?" "I've started wars for less," Julian said softly. The temperature at the table dropped 20 degrees. Vitti stopped laughing. He looked at Julian, then at Sarah. He saw the way Julian's body was angled toward her, protective, possessive. "Fine," Vitti spat. "We accept the territory lines, for now." The meeting ended. But as they walked back to the car, Sarah felt trembling in her hands. "You lied," she whispered to Julian as he buckled Leo into the car seat. "You told them I was his mother." Julian slammed the car door shut and turned to her. He pinned her against the side of the SUV. He didn't touch her, but his body shielded her from the view of Vitti's men. "In this world, perception is everything," he murmured. His face was inches from hers. "If they think you are just help, they will target you to get to me. If they think you are mine, they will hesitate." "Am I?" Sarah breathed. "Yours." Julian stared at her lips. For a second she thought he was going to kiss her. The impulse was there, raw, magnetic. "Get in the car, Sarah," he rasped, pulling away abruptly. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the awkward silence of before. It was a silence filled with things unsaid. When they arrived at the estate, the sun was setting. The gates opened. But as they drove up the long driveway, Marco slammed on the brakes. "Ambush!" Marco screamed. Glass shattered. A bullet took out the windshield, missing the driver's head by inches. "Get down!" Julian roared. He threw his body over Sarah and the baby seat in the back. Chaos erupted. The SUV was being fired upon from the trees lining the driveway. The armored plating held the heavy rounds, but the noise was deafening. Leo started screaming. "Marco, drive," Julian commanded. "Tires are blown. Boss." "We run," Julian said. He looked at Sarah. His face was bleeding from a shard of glass, but his eyes were focused. "Listen to me. When I open this door, you run for the front porch. Do not look back. Do not stop. I will cover you." "What about you?" Sarah cried, clutching Leo. "I am the target," Julian said grimly. "They won't shoot you if they have a shot at me." He pulled a handgun from a holster beneath his jacket. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a soldier. "Go!" Julian kicked the door open and rolled out, firing into the trees. Sarah didn't think. She grabbed Leo and sprinted. She ran through the gravel, her heels sinking, her breath tearing at her lungs. Gunshots popped behind her, crack, crack, crack. She heard men shouting. She heard Julian roaring orders to his security team, who were pouring out of the house. She reached the heavy oak front doors just as Marco's men pulled them open. She tumbled inside, collapsing onto the marble floor. "Secure the house!" someone shouted. Sarah scrambled up, clutching Leo, and ran to the window. She had to see. Outside the driveway was a war zone. Smoke, flashing lights. She saw Julian. He was standing behind the SUV, reloading his weapon with practiced ease. He wasn't hiding. He was advancing. Then she saw it. A man in black tactical gear had flanked the car. He was aiming a rifle at Julian's exposed back. "Julian!" Sarah screamed, though he couldn't hear her through the bulletproof glass. But Julian Moretti had instincts that bordered on supernatural. He spun around, raising his gun, and fired 3 times. The assassin dropped. But another shadow moved, not toward Julian, toward the house, toward the side door. The door that led to the kitchen, the door Sarah had unlocked earlier to let fresh air in while baking cookies. She had forgotten to lock it. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. "The kitchen," she whispered. She looked around. The guards were all outside or at the front door. Sarah looked at Leo. She saw a heavy antique vase on the hallway table. She put Leo down behind a marble statue. "Stay quiet," she begged the crying baby. She grabbed the vase. She kicked off her heels, and she ran toward the kitchen. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a killer. She was a mother. And someone was coming into her house to hurt her children. Sarah Bennett disappeared into the dark hallway just as the kitchen door handle began to turn. The kitchen was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning tearing through the sky outside. The smell of burnt cookies, a domestic scent turned asuu, hung in the air. Sarah pressed her back against the granite island, her breathing shallow and ragged. In her hands, the heavy porcelain vase felt slippery with the sweat of her palms. She listened. The doorknob turned. Click. The door groaned open, letting in a gust of wet, freezing wind. Heavy boots stepped onto the tiled floor. Thump, thump. The intruder moved with purpose. He wasn't checking corners. He knew exactly where he was going. He was heading for the main hallway. He was heading toward where she had hidden Leo. Sarah's terror transmuted into a cold, hard rage. Not my children. She waited until the figure passed the island. He was a large man dressed in black, a suppressor attached to the pistol in his hand. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She stepped out from the shadows and swung the heavy vase with every ounce of strength she possessed. Crash! The porcelain connected with the back of the man's head with a sickening thud, shattering into 1,000 razor-sharp shards. The man grunted a guttural sound of shock and stumbled forward, dropping to one knee. Ideally, he would have been knocked unconscious. But this was a professional killer, fueled by adrenaline. He roared, spinning around, blood pouring down his neck. His eyes were hauled unfocused, but furious. He raised the gun. Sarah froze. She had no weapon left. The man smirked, his teeth stained with blood. "Bitch!" he hissed. He squeezed the trigger. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Sarah flinched, waiting for the pain, waiting for the end. But the bullet didn't hit her. The intruder's head snapped back as if pulled by an invisible string. He collapsed backward, dead, before he hit the floor. Standing in the doorway connecting the dining room to the kitchen was Julian. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His tuxedo was torn, his face streaked with soot and rain. He held his smoking gun with a steady hand, but his chest was heaving. "Sarah," he choked out. He took a step toward her, and then stumbled. "Julian!" Sarah rushed forward, catching him just as his knees gave way. He was heavy, a dead weight against her. Her hand slipped on his jacket. It was wet, but not with rain. It was warm. She pulled her hand back. It was covered in bright crimson blood. "You're shot," she gasped, panic rising in her throat. "Side!" Julian gritted out, his face draining of color. "Through and through. Just missed the liver, I think." "Marco!" Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the house. "Marco, help!" Julian gripped her arm. His grip was weak, trembling. "Leo, Lily, are they? They're safe. I hid them. They're safe." "Good," Julian whispered. His eyes rolled back and he slumped against her. The next hour was a blur of chaos. Marco and the security team swarmed the house. Paramedics, private ones on the Moretti payroll, arrived in unmarked vans. They didn't go to a public hospital where police would ask questions. They went to a private clinic in the Loop, a sterile fortress of glass and steel. Sarah refused to leave. She had Lily on one hip and Leo in a carrier pacing the waiting room floor. Her dress was ruined, stained with Julian's blood and the intruder's blood. She looked insane, but when the nurses tried to tell her to sit down, one look from her eyes made them retreat. She wasn't the nanny anymore. She was the survivor. 4 hours later, a doctor in surgical scrubs emerged. "Miss Bennett, how is he?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward. "He lost a lot of blood," the doctor said gravely. "The bullet nicked an artery. But he is strong. We've stabilized him. He's in recovery." Sarah let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since the driveway. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the waiting room chair, pulling Lily onto her lap. "Can I see him? He's sedated. He needs rest." "I didn't ask what he needs," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "I asked if I can see him." The doctor looked at Marco, who was standing guard by the door. Marco gave a subtle nod. 5 minutes, the doctor conceded. Sarah walked into the dimly lit room. Julian looked smaller in the hospital bed, stripped of his suits and his armor. He was pale wires and tubes connecting him to monitors that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. She walked to the bedside. She didn't cry. She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and lifeless. "You can't die," she whispered fiercely. "You promised me no one would break my toaster. You promised Lily a home. You don't get to quit now." She squeezed his hand, and faintly, weakly, she felt a squeeze back. 3 days later, they were moved to a safe house. It was a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, completely off the books. The windows were bulletproof, the elevator required a retinal scan, and the fridge was fully stocked. Julian was recovering with a speed that defied medical science. He was already sitting up, working on a laptop, ignoring the doctor's orders to rest. But the atmosphere in the penthouse was tense. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea. She watched Julian through the open living room door. He was talking to Marco. His voice was low, dangerous. "Find out how they knew," Julian was saying. "The kitchen door, the timing. They knew exactly when the shift change was. They knew I was taking the armored SUV, not the sedan. That was an inside job." "We're scrubbing the comms, boss," Marco said. "We found a burner phone on the shooter in the kitchen. We're decrypting it now." Sarah walked in with the tea. She set it down on the table. Julian looked up at her. His eyes softened, but the tension in his jaw remained. "You should be resting," she said. "I can't rest while there is a rat in my house," Julian replied. "Maybe it wasn't a rat," Sarah said. "Maybe they just got lucky." "There is no luck in this business, Sarah. Only strategy and betrayal." Just then, Marco's tablet pinged. He looked down at the screen and his face went white. He looked at Julian, then at Sarah, then back at the tablet. "What?" Julian barked. "Boss, the burner phone. The last call received. It wasn't from one of our guys." "Who was it?" Marco swallowed hard. "It was from a registered number. A prepaid cell found in the possession of Gary Bennett." The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the penthouse. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "Your ex-husband," Julian said, his voice deadly calm. He looked at Sarah, but his eyes weren't accusing. They were calculating. "He sold us out." "No." Sarah shook her head. "Gary is a gambler. He's a loser. But he's not. He doesn't know anything about you. How could he know the layout?" "The schedule." Julian turned his gaze to Lily, who was playing with blocks in the corner of the room. "Visitation," Julian said softly. Sarah felt sick. He asked her." "Lily," Julian called out gently. The little girl looked up. "Yes, Mr. Julian. When you saw your daddy last week, did he play a game with you? Did he ask you about the house?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. We played spy. He asked me to draw a map of the castle. He wanted to know where the Sleeping Beauty slept, and where the guards stood. He said he was going to send me a surprise." Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. The betrayal was so visceral, it physically hurt. Her ex-husband had used their daughter to draw a map for assassins. He had sold their lives, Lily's life, to pay off his gambling debts. "Oh my God," Sarah wept. "It's my fault. I let him see her. I brought this to your door." She turned to run, to hide, to leave. She couldn't be here. She was the leak. "Sarah." Julian's voice cracked like a whip. He winced as he forced himself up from the couch, ignoring the pain in his side. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her arm, spinning her around. "Let me go," she sobbed. "I have to leave. I'm a danger to you." "You are not going anywhere," Julian growled. He pulled her closer, his good hand cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. "This is not your fault. This is the act of a desperate, evil man. Do not take his sin and make it yours." "But he used her. He used me, and he will pay for it," Julian vowed. The darkness in his eyes was terrifying, but it wasn't directed at her. "He thinks he sold me out to Viti, but all he did was sign his own death warrant." "I can't stay," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look at this life, Julian. Guns, blood. My daughter drawing maps for killers. I can't do this." "You can," Julian said. His voice dropped to a whisper. His thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. "Because you are the strongest person I have ever met. You walked into a kitchen with a vase to fight a hitman. You saved my son. You saved me." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart." He looked at her lips. The distance between them vanished. The adrenaline, the fear, the relief, it all culminated in this single moment. Julian lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of tea and danger and promise. Sarah froze for a heartbeat, and then she melted into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, careful of his wound, and held on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they pulled apart, breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "You are not the nanny," he rasped. "Not anymore. You are mine, and I protect what is mine." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, fear for Gary, despite everything still lingering. Not because she loved him, but because he was Lily's father. Julian's eyes hardened. "I'm going to finish the custody battle. Tonight." The midnight air in Chicago's meatpacking district was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of rust, old ice, and the metallic tang of the nearby train tracks. The warehouse Julian had chosen was an unassuming brick relic from the 1920s, a place where echoes lasted longer than they should. The black sedan rolled to a stop on the cracked pavement. Rain was beginning to fall again, a freezing sleet that coated the world in grey. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Sarah Bennett sat in the back seat next to Julian. He was pale, his movement stiff from the bullet wound in his side, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying, cold resolve. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than the building they were parked in front of. "You don't have to go in there," Julian said, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't look at her. He was watching the warehouse door. "Marco can handle the paperwork. You don't need to see him like this." Sarah smoothed the lapel of her trench coat. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from a cocktail of rage and adrenaline. "He used my daughter to draw a map for your assassins, Julian. He put a target on a 4-year-old's back. If I don't look him in the eye when this ends, I'll never truly be free of him." Julian turned his head slowly. He studied her profile, seeing the steel that had forged itself in her spine over the last 48 hours. He nodded once, a gesture of supreme respect. "Then let's finish it." They exited the car. Marco and 2 other guards were already waiting by the heavy steel sliding door. Marco looked grim. He nodded to Julian, then heaved the door upward. It rattled on its tracks, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit space. In the center of the vast concrete floor sat a single wooden chair. And in that chair, bound by zip ties, sat Gary Bennett. Gary looked nothing like the arrogant man who had sneered at Sarah in family court. His expensive leather jacket was torn. His left eye was swollen shut, purple and angry, and his lip was split. He was shivering violently, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the freezing temperature. When he saw them, he practically convulsed against the restraints. "Sarah," Gary choked out, spitting blood onto the concrete. "Sarah, baby. Thank God. Tell these psychopaths who I am. It was a misunderstanding, sir. I didn't know." Sarah walked into the light. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the concrete, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. She stopped 5 feet from him. She looked at the man she had once promised to love and cherish, the man who had systematically destroyed her confidence for years. "You didn't know?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "No, I swear." Gary blubbered, his eyes darting to Julian, who was leaning heavily on a black cane in the shadows. "Vitti, his guys. They told me they just wanted to talk to him. They said they wanted to scare him into a business deal. They promised no one would get hurt." "You're lying," Julian said. He stepped forward, the cane tapping ominously. "We recovered the audio from the burner phone, Gary. We heard the recording." Julian pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. Gary's voice, tinny and distinct, filled the warehouse. "The nursery is in the east wing. Second door on the left. The guards change at 6:00 p.m. That's your window. Just make sure I get the 50 grand by morning." The recording clicked off. Gary slumped in the chair, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. "You told them where the nursery was," Sarah whispered. The rage she felt wasn't hot. It was cold, absolute zero. "You didn't just sell out Julian. You pointed a gun at Lily's head for $50,000. That's what she's worth to you. A few hands of poker." "I was in deep, Sarah. They were going to break my legs." Gary sobbed, snot running down his face. "I had no choice." "We all have choices," Julian said. He signaled Marco. Marco stepped forward and handed Sarah a thick manila folder. "What is this?" Gary whimpered. "Your exit strategy," Julian said. "Or your death warrant. It depends on the next 60 seconds. Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a legal document drafted by the most expensive lawyers in the city. It was a complete, irrevocable surrender of parental rights. "You are going to sign this," Sarah said, her voice steady. "You are going to give me sole legal and physical custody of Lily. You will waive all visitation. You will remove your name from her birth certificate. You will be a stranger to her." Gary stared at the papers. And if I do?" "Then you leave," Julian interjected. "Marco has a bus ticket for you, one way, to Tucson, Arizona. You get on that bus and you never come back to Illinois. If you set foot in Chicago again, if you ever try to contact Sarah or the girl, the police get the recording, and my associates get the rest of you." Gary looked at the pen Marco was holding out. He looked at the gun on Marco's hip. He looked at Julian's cold, dead eyes. Then he looked at Sarah, searching for a shred of the timid woman he used to bully. He found only a wall of stone. "Sarah, please," he whispered, a last-ditch effort at manipulation. "She's my little girl." "She stopped being your little girl the moment you drew a map for the men coming to kill her," Sarah said. "Sign the papers, Gary. It's the only mercy you're going to find in this room." With a shaking hand, Gary took the pen. He wept as he scribbled his signature on the dotted line, his tears staining the paper. Marco snatched the documents away the second the pen lifted. He checked the signature, then nodded to Julian. "It's done." "Get him out of my sight," Julian ordered, turning his back. Gary was hauled to his feet. As he was dragged toward the back exit, he looked back one last time, but Sarah was already walking away. She didn't watch him leave. He was already a ghost to her. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner, sharper. Sarah leaned against the black sedan, clutching the folder to her chest. She felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her knees weak. "Are you all right?" Julian asked. He was standing close to her, his body shielding her from the wind. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. She looked up at him. The streetlights reflected in his dark eyes. "I feel lighter. But I also feel terrified. Gary is gone. But the threat. Viti is still out there, isn't he? Viti will be handled." Julian said, his tone leaving no doubt as to what that meant. "But the danger, it is part of my world. Sarah, I told you this. Now that Gary is gone, you have a choice." He gestured to the folder in her arms. "You have the check I gave you. You have full custody. You can take Lily and go anywhere in the world. Paris, London, a quiet town in Vermont where no one knows the name Moretti. I will ensure you are safe from afar. You can have a normal life." Sarah looked at the folder, then at the man standing before her. She thought about the normal life she had before the struggle, the loneliness, the fear of poverty. Then she thought about the last month, the way Julian looked at Leo, the way he had shielded her body with his own in the driveway, the way Lily had laughed in the garden. Safety wasn't about location. It was about who was standing beside you. Sarah took a step closer to him, invading his personal space. She reached out and placed her hand gently over the bandage on his side. "Leo needs a mother," she said, softly. Julian flinched, his breath hitching. "Sarah, and Lily," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "She needs a father who keeps his promises, a father who protects her, not one who sells her out." She looked up into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability he hid from everyone else. "And I don't want a normal life, Julian. I want a real one. With you." Julian let out a ragged breath, dropping his cane. It clattered to the pavement unnoticed. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. It was an embrace of desperation and devotion. "Then you have me," he vowed, his voice vibrating against her skin. "Every part of me, until the day I die." They stood there in the quiet street, a single mother and a mafia don bound by blood, and a promise that was stronger than any contract. The late afternoon sun bathed the Moretti estate in a warm golden glow. The high walls and iron gates were still there, but the atmosphere inside had transformed. The silence of the mausoleum was gone, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful sounds of life. The sprawling back garden was decorated with streamers and balloons. It was Leo's second birthday, and the turnout was eclectic. Burly security guards were awkwardly wearing party hats, sipping fruit punch. The stiff French chef was on his knees in the grass, laughing as Lily, now 5, and missing a front tooth, showed him a beetle she had found. Sarah stood on the terrace balcony looking down at the scene. She wore a pale yellow sundress that caught the breeze. Her hand rested instinctively on her stomach, where a small, barely there bump hinted at the new addition to the family, arriving in 6 months. She felt a presence behind her, warm and solid. Julian stepped up, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his cheek pressing against hers. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was in a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking younger, lighter. "They're happy," he murmured, watching Leo wobble-run across the grass, chasing a golden retriever puppy named Barnaby. "We're happy," Sarah corrected him, leaning back into his embrace. "Did you ever think," Julian asked quietly that day in the restaurant, "when you marched up to my table and demanded my son, did you think it would end like this?" Sarah smiled, remembering the fear, the rain, and the screaming baby. "I didn't think," she admitted. "I just heard a baby crying, and I saw a father who didn't know how to ask for help." Julian turned her around in his arms. The cold, sharp angles of his face had softened over the year. The ice in his eyes had melted into something warm and profound. "You didn't just stop the crying, Sarah," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You woke me up. You saved us all." "I intend to keep saving you," she teased softly. "Every day. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." He kissed her, then a slow, deep kiss under the golden sun, surrounded by the laughter of their children. The war outside the walls would always exist, but inside they had built something unbreakable. The crying had stopped. The living had begun.